That night, as the sky over New York City looked hand-painted, lit by beams of light slicing through skyscrapers like they were trying to reach the stars, Enzo Delacroix stepped out of his Lamborghini like a king descending from his throne. The ballroom of the five-star hotel, part of his own luxury chain by the way, buzzed with voices, clinking glasses, fake smiles, and perfumes too expensive to be remembered the next morning. He walked in like a monarch fully aware of the power he wielded. Tall, with a sculpted physique honed by hours at the gym and enviable genetics, he wore a tailored Italian suit, a perfectly trimmed beard, and storm-gray eyes that seemed to know too much. He didn't need to speak to be heard. Enzo was the kind of man who silenced others just by being there, and he knew it. He always had. At the most sought-after table of the evening, surrounded by businessmen, politicians, and glittering socialites, Enzo raised his glass with that crooked smile, one that had shattered more hearts than he could be bothered to count. His friends knew him well. Enzo didn't believe in love. To him, emotions were weaknesses, distractions used by the weak as an excuse not to win. Women, they were like investments, analyzed, selected, and discarded once their purpose had been served. None ever challenged him, none ever resisted, and that bored him. "I bet I can get any woman here to go out with me tonight," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance as he surveyed the room with a touch of disdain. "Any woman?" replied Arthur, his business partner, with a cynical smirk. "Any woman," Enzo repeated, downing the red wine like it was water. Just then, a waiter stumbled slightly beside the table and was quickly corrected by a poised maitre d'. And in the background, amidst trays of hors d'oeuvres and flutes of champagne, one figure stood out, precisely because she wasn't trying to. A young woman, hair tied back in a messy bun, sun-kissed skin, tired eyes, wearing a simple waitress uniform and worn-out sneakers. She carried a tray of drinks with rehearsed motions, as if she'd done it hundreds of times. Her eyes weren't searching for anyone. They were fixed on the floor, on balance, on routine, invisible to all, except Enzo. "That one," he nodded with his chin. "The waitress?" His friends laughed. "Exactly. I'll have her walking out with me before the night ends." Laughter echoed like a toast to madness. Not because she wasn't beautiful, on the contrary. There was something profoundly captivating in her unadorned simplicity. But because everyone knew, women like her don't look at men like him, and men like him don't get involved with women like her. But there he was, Enzo Delacroix, the king of a luxury empire, about to enter a game he had no idea how to lose. A wager made between pride and crystal glasses. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she wasn't just another challenge. She was a revolution waiting to happen, and he was about to be brought to his knees by something he never saw coming: true love. While the world spun in haste, fueled by numbers, egos, and cheap applause, there was a young woman walking at a different pace, a silent rhythm made of tight schedules, sore feet, and dreams buried deep in her chest. Her name was Livia Montero. She was 24, but carried the weight of a lifetime on her shoulders. Every morning was a battle against accumulated exhaustion, against the fear of not being enough, against the constant feeling of falling behind. And yet, she kept going. Livia woke up before the sun. She had a quick coffee, usually reheated, and took 2 buses to the clinic where she worked as a receptionist. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, performing tasks with excellence that no one ever noticed. She greeted patients with a quiet smile, organized medical files, helped the elderly sit down. No one knew her dreams. No one asked about her life. She was just the girl at the front desk, and for the world around her, that was enough. When her shift ended, she went home, a small apartment in a forgotten neighborhood on the east side, only to change clothes, kiss her mother quickly, check her medication, and leave again. At night, she put on her waitress uniform and crossed the city to work luxury events where the same faces appeared. The smiles seemed rehearsed, and loneliness hid behind expensive dresses. In that golden world, made for show, Livia was invisible. She moved between guests like part of the furniture. No one looked her in the eyes. No one said a sincere thank you. Her value lay in the efficiency with which she carried glasses and pretended not to exist. But behind that calm expression, there was a universe no one saw. Livia studied nursing at a public university at night when she managed to swap shifts. She was passionate about caring for others, about understanding their pain, perhaps because she herself knew pain all too well. Her father abandoned the family when she was 9. Her mother, severely affected by a series of strokes, now lived in a wheelchair. her mind trapped between moments of clarity and deep silences. There were no siblings, no help. Everything rested on Livia's slim shoulders, and she never complained. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she learned early on that no one listens to the cries of those without a title, stunning beauty, or a luxurious last name. That night, she was more tired than usual. One of the buses was late. The event manager yelled at her over a mistake that wasn't even hers. Her mother had suffered a small seizure that morning. And still, there she was, smiling among the guests, balancing glasses with the same grace with which she held up the world. She didn't know it, but her eyes, despite the dark circles and bare lashes, held a glow that couldn't be faked. It was the beauty of someone who survives every day without losing their sweetness. That was when she felt it. That gaze. Steady, invasive, insistent. She looked up for a second, only to meet the eyes of the most striking man she had ever seen, Enzo. But to her, he was just another client. Handsome, sure. Rich, probably. But still, a man from the other side of the abyss. She looked away, returned to her post, ignored the flutter in her chest that she didn't even have time to understand. She had no idea she had just stepped into a story that would change her life. Because sometimes, it's precisely when love finds the most hidden pain that something unforgettable is born. She crossed the ballroom with firm, swift steps, like someone who had learned to be discreet out of sheer survival. The tray in her hands was perfectly balanced, and her eyes, though fixed on the floor, held a concentration only those living between exhaustion and duty could sustain. Livia didn't want to be there. She didn't want to hear another drunken joke from a client or endure eyes that undressed her without consent. She wanted to go home, tuck her mother into bed, study one more chapter of anatomy, maybe cry silently into her pillow. But she couldn't. Life didn't pause for those who weren't born with a safety net. It was between one glass and another that she felt something strange, as if a pair of eyes had pierced through her routine. She looked up reflexively, with the guarded air of someone who's seen too much, and then their eyes met. He was there, leaning casually against a column, shirt partially unbuttoned, flawless dark suit, drink in hand, and a lopsided smile that seemed to carry secrets. Enzo's storm-gray eyes didn't waver. They locked onto hers with genuine interest. It wasn't lust, it was curiosity, and that unsettled her. Why would a man like that be looking at her as if he knew her? "Excuse me," he said, approaching with the unhurried confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. His voice was deep, captivating, steady. Livia stopped for a second, confused. "Can I help you?" she asked flatly. "A reason to get to know you," he replied, with a slight smile, as if he were used to charming with ease. She didn't laugh. She didn't blush. She just looked at him as if she knew exactly what he was. Just another one. Another man who thought a rehearsed line could buy time from someone who barely had any for herself. Another pretty face with too much money and too little humility. "I'm working," she said curtly, turning to leave. For the first time in years, Enzo was left hanging. His friends, watching from afar, exchanged discreet chuckles, as if awaiting a show. But what seemed like a simple rejection lit something inside him far more dangerous than bruised pride. Genuine interest. He didn't know why exactly, but that woman, with her steady gaze and hurried steps, had something none of the others did, and he needed to find out what it was. Later that night, he crossed her path again, this time without the forced charm. "Do you like coffee?" he asked sincerely. "I'm not for sale," she replied without blinking. "I didn't mean it like that. I just wanted to talk to you." She looked at him. For the first time, she noticed a trace of something human, perhaps a well-hidden weariness, a slightly cracked facade, but she didn't lower her guard. "I don't have time," she said, and was about to leave, but paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "And you don't seem like someone who understands the value of other people's time." That sentence pierced Enzo like a fine, precise needle. He, who always had the world at his fingertips, suddenly felt control slipping through them. And it was there, on that night of fake lights and hollow promises, that something real was born. Neither of them noticed it. He didn't say his last name. She didn't ask. He stepped out of the spotlight. She kept up her shield. But what began as a game became, with every word left unsaid, a spark ready to set both their worlds on fire. In the days that followed, Enzo Delacroix couldn't focus. Something about that woman unsettled him in a way no amount of money, no yacht getaway, no night of French champagne could numb. He tried to return to his routine, meetings, investments, shareholder lunches. But somewhere in the back of his mind, between signing a contract and chasing the next multi-million-dollar venture, there she was, Livia, with her stern gaze, her steady voice, her clean, unapologetic refusal. It was as if someone had pressed a key he didn't know existed, and now he couldn't turn it off. Too proud to admit that this had already become more than a bet, Enzo began planning casual encounters. He discreetly found out her name through a hotel employee, created excuses to be near the cafe where she paused for 15 minutes between jobs, showed up with open books, pretending to work, as if fate were playing along. And strangely, despite all the emotional armor she wore, she began to notice his presence too. He told her he was just another businessman, hid his last name, spoke little of himself, but listened intently to everything she said. And that was new for Livia. No man had ever really stopped to hear her. No one had asked why she looked so tired, or what she studied during cold, sleepless nights. Enzo did, without hurry, without pressure. And slowly, something in her began to soften, as if, finally, someone could see beyond the uniform. Livia told him about her sick mother, about the exhaustion, about the nursing degree she nearly gave up on, about the fear of failing. Enzo listened like each word was a map to a world he'd never known. And deep down, that's exactly what it was. Because for the first time in his life, he was getting to know someone who didn't want anything from him, except respect. She laughed with him, truly laughed with her eyes, and that disarmed him more than any rejection ever could. He started wanting to see her smile more often. He started to care. He began rearranging entire routines for those small, hidden moments no one else knew about. But behind it all, there were two silent truths, growing like invisible cracks. He still hadn't told her who he was, and she was slowly beginning to trust. The game of seduction, once born of pride and vanity, was now becoming something even Enzo couldn't control. He didn't want to win her to feel triumphant. He wanted her near because with her, he felt more human, more real, less alone. But every secret has an expiration date. And while love blossomed in fertile ground, the shadow of a lie loomed larger. Enzo didn't know how to confess. He feared losing her, feared that revealing the truth would make everything they were building collapse. Livia, on her side, was beginning to dream again. Still cautious, still carrying her scars. But something inside her was warming. Her gaze became lighter, her days more bearable. Maybe, just maybe, she was allowing herself to believe. But in every story where love is born on a minefield of secrets, there is always a moment when everything explodes. And time was running out. There was something different about that Saturday morning. The city was still waking up, lazily, with the sky brushed in a shy shade of blue, while the scent of freshly baked bread drifted from the bakeries, curling around quiet corners. For the first time in years, Enzo didn't reach for his phone as soon as he opened his eyes. He didn't reply to emails, didn't check the stock market. He was on another wavelength, the same one Livia lived on. He was slowly shedding his layers, one by one, without even realizing it, without intending to. Like someone who forgets they were wearing armor until they feel the wind against their bare skin. At the small cafe where they always coincidentally met, encounters that had long ceased being coincidences, Enzo arrived first. Livia, with her hair down for the first time, wore a simple shirt and worn-out jeans. Yet to him, she looked like the most beautiful woman in the world. She sat across from him, accepted his coffee with a smile that lingered longer than usual, and that initial silence felt different. Not awkward, but shared, as if the world had momentarily gone silent, leaving just the two of them, surrounded by cups and unsaid truths. "I always wanted to be a nurse," she said suddenly. "When I was little, my mom used to tell me I had hands meant for caring, and I believed her. Until she got sick, and I started really caring for her." Enzo watched her, like someone witnessing a scene too sacred to interrupt. "She doesn't talk anymore," she continued, her voice trembling. "She just looks at me, sometimes smiles. Other times, she thinks I'm my grandmother. But it's okay. I still take care of her. Because that's what we do for the people we love, right?" There was something so raw and real in her words that Enzo couldn't speak right away. He took a deep breath. And for the first time, he wanted to speak about himself, without numbers, without pretense, without armor. "I lost my mom young," he said, lowering his gaze, "and I swore I'd never need anyone, I built my whole world on that promise. Closed myself off. Did everything to be respected. But deep down, I just didn't want to feel pain again. Livia looked up, surprised. He always seemed so composed, so unreachable, so sure of himself. But there, at that table, sat a man, quietly broken. A man who, like her, carried hidden wounds. "You don't seem like someone who lets others see your scars," she said gently. "Because when people see them, they know where to hurt you," he whispered. That conversation was like an opening in both their chests. A shared vulnerability that changed everything. It was no longer just attraction, nor curiosity. It was something deeper, something that grew from pain, from respect, from truly listening. Enzo began to admire her, not just for her beauty or resilience, but for the way she managed to be strong without ever losing her softness. And Livia, though silent, began to feel that maybe, just maybe, this man who had appeared as an unlikely distraction was, in fact, the first person who truly saw who she was. But even in such intimacy, the lie still hung between them. Enzo was still hiding who he really was. His last name, the fortune, the cursed bet. And the more he fell for her, the harder it became to confess. He walked her to the bus stop. They said goodbye with a long embrace. His heart pounded unevenly. He almost said it, but he didn't. Because the fear of losing her now was stronger than the pride of having once tried to win her over. And, as fate loves irony, it was precisely that silence that was preparing the deepest pain in their story. What begins as a secret, if left unspoken, becomes a ticking bomb. And when it explodes, it doesn't just destroy what's already been built. It rips away the hope of what could have been. That's exactly what happened on the night everything came to light. With the ruthless precision of someone who never intended to spare hearts. It was the birthday celebration of one of the biggest names in the hotel industry, a high-profile event surrounded by journalists, investors, and celebrities. Enzo had promised himself he wouldn't go. Ever since meeting Livia, he'd lost the appetite for those environments of facades and plastic smiles. But his partners insisted. The company needed his presence. His public image was a pillar that supported more than he liked to admit. And with a tightness in his chest he couldn't quite explain, he went. Inside the grand ballroom of Hotel de la Croix, where chandeliers shimmered like stars and guests tried their hardest to appear important, Livia was there too. She'd been called at the last minute to cover for an absent staff member. The pay for that night would be enough to buy her mother's medication, and she couldn't afford to say no. She wore the same simple black uniform, her usual rushed bun, and a name tag barely clinging to the worn-out fabric. She had no idea where she was, no idea that this hotel, this empire, bore the name of the man she'd been falling for. And then, the inevitable happened. As she moved through the room with glistening glasses on her tray, she overheard a group of suited men talking nearby. They were laughing loudly, making crude jokes, and one of them said, "Enzo won again. Bet he'd get the waitress." And he did. He always wins, huh? It was as if time stopped. Livia didn't want to believe it. Her blood ran cold. Her hands trembled. The world around her blurred into a deafening hum. A waiter beside her asked if she was okay. She didn't answer. She just walked mechanically to the reserved area where Enzo was speaking with some investors. He saw her before she spoke. He smiled, surprised and genuinely happy to see her there. But what he met was a gaze he'd never seen before. A cold stare. Pure disappointment. Raw pain. "What did you bet on me?" she asked. Voice low, but sharp as a blade. Enzo froze. "Livia, I can explain. You lied to me. About everything. About who you are. About what we were. About why you even approached me. At first, yes, it was a bet. But then it changed. I changed. You changed me," he said, stepping toward her. "No, Enzo, you didn't change. You just played better. And I was the only one who believed it was real." He tried to explain. Said he had truly fallen in love, that nothing else mattered anymore. But to her, none of it justified the silence, the betrayal, the manipulation. She walked away without looking back, left that golden ballroom like crossing a battlefield, wounded, but upright. She knew she couldn't afford to break, not with the life she had, not with her mother waiting at home, not after all the times she'd been humiliated for being poor, for being a woman, for being invisible. Enzo stayed, motionless, surrounded by people, but utterly alone. The taste of victory, for the first time, was bitter, like poison. And in that moment, he finally understood what he'd never grasped before. Winning someone out of pride is the same as losing her out of love. All his life, Enzo Delacroix believed that power meant control. Control over business, over people, over his own destiny. That a command, a check, or a phone call could fix anything. But that cold dawn, sitting alone in the back seat of his luxury car, his head leaning against the window, and his heart pounding in an unfamiliar rhythm, he understood, with the force of a painful epiphany, that not all damage can be repaired with power. Some require humility, truth, time, and maybe not even that is enough. Livia had vanished. She turned off her phone, left the college group, skipped her shifts. She disappeared from his world as if she had never existed, and that made him feel small. For the first time, Enzo felt like an ordinary man. A man who had made a mistake, a man who had hurt someone who never deserved to be hurt. And with that, he felt less like a millionaire and more like a human being, as if all his masks had been torn off, leaving only himself, bare before the weight of guilt. The days that followed were marked by a restlessness, no meeting, no profit, no trip could silence. Enzo canceled events, turned down offers, muted his phone. He spent more time in silence than speaking. He remembered every word she said, every timid smile, every confession. And he hated himself for letting his pride lead the way. The bet, the disguise, the lie. Because deep down, he knew she deserved the truth from the beginning. That's when he made a decision. He went looking for her. No bodyguards, no media, just him. He entered neighborhoods he'd never set foot in, felt the cracked asphalt beneath his Italian shoes, smelled the simple food wafting through windows, heard children playing in the streets. And there, in that reality he had always ignored, he began to understand who Livia was and why she was so strong. He found her address through the company's event records, knocked on the door. A neighbor answered. She said Livia was at the hospital with her mother, who had worsened in recent days. And there, among those modest walls, Enzo felt real life press against his chest, not with violence, but with a gentle, overwhelming ache. He went to the hospital, entered quietly, his heart in his throat, saw her from a distance. Livia was there, exhausted, seated by her mother's bed, red eyes, messy hair, hands holding the fragile woman's hand as she struggled to breathe. Enzo didn't have the courage to approach. He just watched through the glass, and there, something inside him broke. In the days that followed, he began sending expensive medications anonymously. He transferred funds to the hospital under the name of a charitable foundation, ensured her mother received the best treatment, never signing his name. He didn't want credit, didn't want to buy forgiveness. He just wanted to do something right, even if she never found out. But Livia did find out. When she learned that all expenses were covered by a newly registered foundation, she looked up the tax ID. The foundation's name was Montero Luz. And there, holding the paper in her hands, she broke down in tears. She knew. She knew there was only one person in the world who would do that. And for the first time since leaving that golden ballroom, she felt that maybe the man who shattered her heart was trying to rebuild something, even in silence. But forgiveness isn't simple. And love, even when true, doesn't survive on grand gestures alone. It needs more. It needs truth. It needs courage. And that was exactly what fate was beginning to prepare, the moment when they would meet again, not as adversaries, but as two people who had survived the worst parts of themselves. The dawn smelled of hospital alcohol, polished floors, and restrained sighs. In the dim light of room 112, where machines monitored heartbeats and alarms whispered like quiet technological murmurs, Livia held her mother's hand, as if it were the only anchor keeping her upright. Her condition had worsened. Pneumonia had joined the already fragile neurological state. The doctors had been clear. There was a risk of cardiac arrest. And even though Livia had faced bigger battles, the feeling of helplessness had never hurt this much. She no longer knew how to stay strong. It was at that moment, almost as if fate had been waiting for her defenses to fall, that someone knocked at the door. A nurse came in, saying someone wanted to see her. Livia frowned, irritated by the interruption. But when she stepped outside, the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. It was Enzo. He wore jeans, a simple t-shirt, and the most humble eyes she had ever seen on someone so powerful. There was no arrogance, no calculated charm, no unreachable posture. It was just him, tired, vulnerable, full of remorse. "I'm not here to justify myself," he said before she could speak. "I just needed to look into your eyes and tell you that I'm sorry. For everything. For the bet. For the lie. For not trusting you enough to be honest from the beginning." Livia remained silent. Anger still burned somewhere inside. But what dominated now was something else. A lump in her throat made of longing, fear, love, and exhaustion. "You have no idea what it cost me to believe in someone, Enzo," she said, eyes glistening. "And when I finally let my guard down, you stepped all over it." "I know, and I'll carry that forever," he replied, his voice cracking. "But I also know you changed me. I saw the world through your eyes, and I haven't been able to close mine since." She took a deep breath. He went on. "I created a foundation in your mother's name, Montero Luz. I didn't want you to know, but everything I have, everything I've built, it doesn't mean anything if I can't share it with you." Livia felt her heart shift. He wasn't apologizing with flowers or rehearsed speeches. He acted, and maybe, just maybe, that was more real than any romantic gesture. "You're a man who doesn't know how to lose, huh?" she asked with a faint smile. "Not until I lost you," he whispered. It was at that moment that the sound of the heart monitor spiked. Both of them rushed into the room. Livia's mother was deteriorating rapidly. Doctors flooded in. Enzo stepped out, respecting the moment, but remained in the hallway, waiting, praying. Something he had never done, for the most important woman in Livia's life to survive. After hours of tension, the news came. Her mother had stabilized. A miracle, some said. Resilience, said the doctor. Love, anyone who knew that daughter's devotion would say. When Livia stepped out of the room, she looked at Enzo from a distance. He said nothing. He just looked at her, like someone who finally understands that some victories aren't held in the hands, but in the eyes of those who stay. And there, between endless exhaustion and unspoken gratitude, she walked toward him and embraced him. It wasn't a kiss, it wasn't a promise, it was just a hug, but it held everything. It was the first step towards something new, something more real, more vulnerable, more possible. Because sometimes, love must first be destroyed in order to be reborn with deeper roots. Time passed as it does after a storm. Slowly, quietly, but heavy with rebuilding. Livia didn't return to Enzo's arms right away. She returned, first, to herself. She finished college with tears in her eyes as she crossed the graduation stage, diploma trembling in her hands, and her mother's wheelchair waiting at the back of the audience, where dimmed eyes still shimmered with a reflection of pride. She began working at a community health clinic, where every patient was treated with the same dignity she had always longed to receive. And every day, before putting on her white coat, she remembered everything she had overcome: pain, hunger, disappointment, and smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because at last, she knew who she was. Enzo changed too. He sold part of his holding company, let go of the luxury events, the endless meetings, the friends who only knew how to laugh at hollow bets. He began visiting underserved communities, learning real stories, funding health and education projects, not for marketing, but because he genuinely wanted to give something back to the world. He was often seen in public hospitals, listening to doctors, talking to patients, sitting on hard benches where he once never imagined himself. It was as if he had finally discovered that true wealth lives where money cannot reach. For months, they didn't see each other, until that night. The event was a charity gala, hosted by one of the NGOs funded by Enzo, aimed at supporting newly graduated nurses working in vulnerable areas. Livia had been invited as a speaker. She hesitated before accepting, but something inside her, perhaps her heart, perhaps her courage, told her the time had come. She entered the hall wearing a simple navy blue dress, her hair falling down her back, her eyes more serene than ever. Enzo stood at the back, his face a blend of nervousness and hope. When their eyes met, everything went silent, as if the world was holding its breath. After the speech, where she spoke about caring, enduring, and beginning again, he approached, with slow steps, unhurried. She was waiting for him, this time, without armor, without resentment, without fear. "You look even more beautiful," he said, almost in a whisper. "And you look real," she replied with a gentle smile. "I wanted to ask you something, but not today, not here. Just seeing you is more than I imagined." "Then ask me," she said, lifting her chin, her gaze steady. "Do you believe in second chances?" Livia looked at him for a few seconds, and then, as if all the wounds had finally healed, she said yes, with her eyes. They left together, not as two strangers trying to fill emptiness, but as two survivors who had chosen each other again. This time, with truth. They walked through the city's lit-up streets as equals. No secrets, no masks. The night was cool, the moon high. They walked hand in hand, in silence. But inside both of them, the heart was speaking loudly. This time, it's real love. 5 years had passed since that first night when an arrogant gaze collided with the silent strength of an invisible woman. And if someone had said back then that this unlikely encounter would change everything, perhaps no one would have believed it. But life, that unpredictable artisan of twists and turns, stitched the scraps of pain, pride, courage, and tenderness with such precision that the improbable became destiny, and what was born from a bet became a family. Today, Enzo Delacroix is known not for the fortune he holds, but for the institutions he transformed. The Montero Luz Foundation, created in honor of Livia's mother, has expanded across more than 20 states, offering free medical care to forgotten communities. Livia, now a doctor of community nursing, leads the field programs, accompanying medical caravans, training professionals, and bringing dignity where once there was only neglect. They live in a modest home, surrounded by trees and children's laughter, in a neighborhood where wealth is measured by genuine smiles and lazy Sunday afternoons. They have a daughter, Aurora, who inherited her father's eyes and her mother's heart, and who runs through the backyard with the joy of someone who already knows she is deeply loved. Once, Enzo was invited for a national television interview about his transformation from businessman to philanthropist. Sitting in front of the cameras, with that same half-smile that once defined him, he answered the question so many had wanted to ask. "Mr. Delacroix, what changed your life?" He took a deep breath, looked straight into the camera, and replied, "A woman who didn't sell herself for appearances, who didn't bow to my money, and who showed me that true love can't be bought and can't be won in a bet. It's earned every single day with truth, sacrifice, and presence." The clip went viral. Thousands were moved. But Livia, watching from home, simply smiled. She knew those words weren't for the public. They were for her. That night, as they tucked Aurora into bed, she rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I almost didn't believe." "In me?" he asked. "In love," she replied. "But you showed me that even something that starts all wrong can become exactly what we needed most." He kissed her forehead, and there, in the silence of a home built with bricks of forgiveness, they fell asleep together, like two people who knew they had won the greatest battle of all, the battle of being loved, completely.